the bench to score. He's one of a few new faces brought in by Eric Ten Hag. It's a win for the FA Cup holders on the opening night, and there are 6 more games tomorrow, of course, including Ipswich's first game in the top flight for 22 years. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in our press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis-Simons, and the journalist and president of Murray Edwards College at Cambridge University, Dorothy Byrne. Now, among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Times, its headline: strike pain for travellers despite big wage rises. We'll be right back. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what is making headlines with the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis-Simons, and the journalist and president of Murray Edwards College at Cambridge, Dorothy Byrne. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. And we'll start with the Times, which leads with the news that despite an increased pay offer to ASLEF train drivers, the union has announced more action on LNER services in the coming weeks. Same story on the front of the Mail, which asks, has Labour lost control of the unions already? The Daily Telegraph carries an admission by the Crown Prosecution Service that incorrect evidence was submitted at the original trial of the baby killer nurse Lucy Letby. The head of a leading group of GPs has told the Eye that Labour's pledge to make it easier for patients to get an appointment can only be achieved with more funding. The Express is campaigning for the restoration of the winter fuel payment for pensioners, saying many are facing a life or death situation this year. The Guardian says a new Home Office unit is to be set up to tackle the rise in violent teenage crime. As the new Premier League season gets underway, the Mirror speaks to the Match of the Day pundit Alan Shearer about the death of his father earlier this year. The Financial Times says that UK startup bank Revolut has been valued at over $45 billion ahead of a sale of shares to its employers. And finally, The Star has advice from experts on how to make new friends. Just slag off some of your existing friends to them. I'm not sure I'd take that advice. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. Tonight, we're joined by Jake Wallis-Simons and Dorothy Byrne. Jake, Dorothy, thanks both for being with us. We do appreciate it. Let's get straight into it and start with the Times. This is the story about ASLEF drivers going out on strike action again, even though one of their other disputes has just been resolved. Yes,
and several newspapers are really putting the pressure on Labour, and not just right-wing papers, because Labour had promised, we'll sort out these strikes that have been disturbing your lives, and now everything will be wonderful now that we're here. And what we see here is, starting with the Times, strike pain for travellers, hopes that all the disruption was over are blown out. ASLEF says it's going to walk out for 22 days on the East Coast Main Line, which is Britain's second busiest line. And that will be every weekend from August the 31st to November the 10th. Not quite what we were all promised would happen. Mm-hmm. And then also within hours of that being announced, that Border Force officers at Heathrow have also announced 4 days of strike at the end of the school holidays. And then the big story that the Times, the Eye is taking up about the GPs as well.
It's interesting, isn't it, Jake? Because, I mean, it was never clear that a new Labour government was going to be able to resolve all these industrial disputes. You know, there's no money left, and that was always the question. But they seem to get in the room quickly and have those conversations, and you kind of got the sense that maybe something had been done, but the reality...
Well, it feels to me as if this is Labour coming into contact with the headache that the Tories were trying to deal with for so long and unsuccessfully too. Labour's solution has been to, in their mind, I mean, to be fair to them, they're trying to reset the relationship, as they put it, by giving this money to these striking public sector workers, because they feel that it's been costing the economy so much money to have these strikes rumbling on, as well as all the inconvenience and headaches to members of the public. So you can see that logic, but the problem is that when you start giving away money early on to people who threatened your predecessors without any real demands for increased productivity, without any assurances that you're not going to strike again particularly, you tend to come across as something of an appeaser, and we all know what happens to them. I mean, they gave the junior doctors 22.3% of a pay rise. That was one of their first things they did coming into office, followed by this 15% pay rise to the train drivers, bringing their average wage up to almost £70,000 driving a train. And lo and behold, more people are striking, more people want some money. If you're giving out money, we want some of it. And unfortunately, it looks like Labour at the moment are encouraging more bad behaviour rather than bringing them to heel, as the Tories failed to do.
So the ASLEF strike that we're going to see on LNER up until November the 10th is a breakdown of industrial relations, they say, and has nothing to do with the pay dispute. But I guess the point is, Dorothy, as Jake was saying, and do you agree that because of the resolution of some of those strikes, more of the unions now are saying, let me see what I can get?
Notoriously, LNER has had bad relationships with ASLEF, but the British public's not going to be particularly interested in that. And I think, James cleverly for the Tories is making the point that people were offered a no-strings pay deal, so it would encourage other people. It may well be that giving money to teachers and to some public service workers was a popular move with people, but perhaps it's the ASLEF dispute where they could see, as you say, these were people earning a lot of money, no strings attached, so other people want more money, and that this could be the deal that will cause them most problems.
Let's look at the way that the Mail are covering it, if we can, guys. Has Labour lost control of the unions already? And you guys will remember that in the run-up to the election, we heard from Sharon Graham, the boss of Unite, saying that she was going to hold this new government's feet to the fire, described as a very formidable individual. I mean, I guess we're seeing some of that, aren't we now?
Yeah, I mean, Labour obviously is much closer to has a closer relationship with the unions, needless to say, than the Tories ever did or ever could. And one would hope that that would enable them to come to a deal that would serve both sides and also the public. Unfortunately, it does seem as if in Keir Starmer's rush to make things right, to reset and to avoid any of this further industrial action that we've seen dogging us for the last few months, he seems to have encouraged them instead. I mean, he's given 6 million public sector workers 9 billion in handouts or in rises so far, which is quite a lot of money considering that they're complaining about a black hole in the finances of, 20 million.
But the alternative would be not fixing the strikes, though, wouldn't it?
I mean, look, I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm just saying that the Tories failed to do it one way, and Labour, it seems, look, the results aren't in yet completely. This could all go away, but it does look like, worryingly, as if the problem's only going to get bigger. Everyone wants more money. The 20% of Britons who work in the public sector are, on average, paid more than the average in the private sector, and their terms and conditions are much better. My fear is that with these big pay rises, it's going to trigger inflation, further inflation, and also, who's going to pay for this? It's the taxpayer.
Let's just bring up the front of the Telegraph. And Dorothy, a final thought from you in the Telegraph headline. I mean, you said it's papers on both sides, but they're suggesting that the strikes could spiral out of control.
It's the same message, isn't it? This legitimate fear, but obviously right-wing papers will play on it, that strikes could run out of control and wage demands, and as you say, that could cause inflation. And of course, it gives the Tories the opportunity, as they say in several papers here, quoting the Tories as saying, these are your paymasters.
Yeah.
So it is damaging to Labour if they do not get this under control.
Let's just skip on and stick with the story, we'll move on to the eye if we can, guys, and talk about the GP's threats to Labour. If I'm right in thinking as well, there is industrial action pending with the GPs as well, isn't there?
That's right. I mean, the GPs have they're in line for a 7.4% pay rise after they threatened to bring the NHS to a standstill. And now the medics are demanding more money in order to enable them to offer more appointments to people. There's this 8 a.m. scramble, which the Eye is talking about, where everyone's dashing to get an appointment because 9 million people have to wait longer than a week to see a GP at the moment. There is this bottleneck. And I think the thing is that it feels like, particularly with the NHS, there's this culture where whenever there's a problem, the only solution is going to be more money. And the NHS has become a bit of a black hole for money in which inefficiency is rampant. And it's obvious that there's no amount of money that you can pour into the NHS to fix it completely if a thing isn't working efficiently. And that's where Streeting has pledged reforms, and I hope they're going to take place. But you can just see the culture of sensing weakness, sensing money, and wanting to come for it that seems to be pervading the public sector.
That's going to be my point to you, Dorothy. West Street has called for reform, hasn't it?
Again, damaging for them because he, as it points out in the Eye, he pledged to reduce GP waiting time, but actually we're going to end up with, I think, 9 million people forced to wait longer than a week to see their GP. And a week might not sound like a long time, but some of these people will be very ill, and waiting more than a week could be catastrophic for them.
Could indeed. All right, Dorothy, Jake, appreciate that good discussion to start with. Let's continue on, and still to come is Kamala Harris doing better than expected against Donald Trump in some of the key swing states. We'll discuss that next.
We know that we have at least 2 kits now, which is absolutely amazing. We have seen 2 simultaneously on the cameras, and there could be more. We don't know. They generally have 2 to 4 kits, but we only put these beavers in last October, a family of 5, and to have a sighting now of 2 beavers emerging, like tiny little miniature beavers emerging from the lodge, this June 30th was the time that we saw them, is a credit to the success of the project, really. The unique thing about our project, at the Ealing Beaver Project, is that we are truly urban and that we're also accessible to the public. So part of the capital ring, the circular route around London, comes through our beaver enclosure. So we're putting beaver reintroduction into an urban area and asking people to come in and experience a beaver wetland emerging over time. So it's a really unique project that puts nature at the heart of the capital and gives people access to truly wild nature. It's really important because beavers are an ecosystem engineer, or also considered a keystone species. They modify their environment, and one of the main objectives of the project is to study how they will impact an urban river catchment and how they will specifically impact urban flood mitigation. The key thing is that beavers have been back in Britain. They've been reintroduced officially and unofficially over the past 20 to 25 years. And one of the justifications for this project of putting them into such an urban area is that beavers are already on the way back in Britain. We think we have about 2,000 to 3,000 beavers living free and wild lives in Britain. So that means they're not behind fences, they're not in licensed enclosure trials, they're living in the wild on various urban river or various river catchments throughout the country. What this project is doing is trying to, A, change hearts and minds and say, this is a species we used to live alongside, let's learn how to live alongside it again. Let's learn how to manage beavers in the urban context on an urban river catchment. And let's show people that this is a species that can have massive benefits to us in terms of alleviating flooding in high rainfall events, alleviating drought in the summertime, attracting in more wildlife, and getting urban communities to experience nature for themselves.
Back. You're watching the press preview with me, Jake Wallis-Simons from the Jewish Chronicle, and Dorothy Byrne, the journalist and former head of news and current affairs at Channel 4. Let's take a look at this story, I think, guys, in the Telegraph. Israeli officials saying that there's a Hamas plot to dig up war graves of British soldiers. Take us through the reporting of this, Jake.
Yes, well, this is some documents that were discovered by the IDF in Gaza in January, and they revealed a Hamas plan to take hostage the remains of British soldiers from 1917. There's a Commonwealth war grave in the middle of Gaza with 3,000 servicemen buried there called Deir el-Balah Cemetery. And Hamas were intending to disinter these British service people and hold them hostages, hold their remains hostage, try to ransom the British government for money. And this was their plan. And I think that what this shows, I mean, in addition to the obvious depravity, I mean, anybody who's been following the events of the last 9 months, the depravity of Hamas will not come as a surprise any longer. But I think for many people watching at home, it will come as a surprise that Britain is being targeted in the same way as the Israelis have been targeted. Lots of Israelis' remains have been held hostage over the years and more recently. I think it just goes to show that Hamas really are not just a menace to the Jewish state, but they're part of a global jihadi threat of the sort that we have faced in Manchester and in London and elsewhere in terror attacks here. They're equally willing to have Britain in the crosshairs as they are Israelis, and indeed they do, because anybody who isn't a Muslim fundamentalist or subscribes to their ideology is a target for them. So it's a menace that faces us all.
Yeah, I mean, the story comes in a week where the Hamas-run health ministry say 40,000 deaths now in Gaza, and at a point where it seems that the ceasefire talks are reaching, in the words of the US president, the final stages.
Well, one can only hope. I mean, when you think more than 40,000 people dead, one of the highest death tolls in this century, the longing around the world for this to end, and also for Israel to get its hostages back, the tragedy to both peoples, I think we can hope this is happening. The language does seem to be different now. We simply don't know. As for this story, obviously it is utterly evil, and it is also ludicrous, because I do not believe that if they had done this, that British people would have said, well, in that case, we'll give you something that you want.
It's difficult to know how we'd have responded. I mean, the Telegraph interviewed some relatives of people who were buried there in the war graves. So it's obviously, you know, if it's your family, it means a lot, and it does mean a lot. It's a huge insult to Britain. But I would just to pick up one point just about the figures, the 40,000 figure. I think it's quite an important one. As you said, it is a figure that's been given by Hamas, who, as we know, tend to inflate figures. But even if we take that figure, 17,000 of those are combatants. And so it's quite a large proportion of those dead, according to Israel.
It's difficult to know that precisely those days.
Well,
but that's according to Israel.
I mean, we've got to be equally happy to take Israel's figures if we're going to take Hamas's figures. So if we've got 40,000, 17,000, then the ratio of combatant to civilian dead is actually better than most modern conflicts, including the ones that we fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm not saying that killing anybody is a good thing, especially not civilians, but I'm just pointing out that figures need to be careful about the messages that we give.
I would say that the 40,000 figure is supported by a number of highly reputable international organisations as well. And I don't personally know about the 17,000 figure.
So you're more... Wait. So,
I'm only saying that on the one side, we've got support for that figure.
Well, this is Hamas,
on the other
it's a Hamas
side,
figure supported by international organisations that have been vivid in their hatred of Israel.
As you all know, that in previous conflicts, those figures have then been supported, and the estimates have come out as the same as the UN and even the IDF in previous conflicts. Now,
in previous conflicts, but not the same in this conflict.
I know, this is a different order of magnitude.
But look, the point wasn't to query Hamas's figure. I mean, you know, I personally have my doubts. But even if you take the 40,000 figure and then add the 17,000 figures of combatants from the IDF, which I think we can give them the benefit of believing that if we're going to believe Hamas, then the ratio is better than in any other modern conflict.
Conversation reveals one of the main reasons why we need to get more journalists into Gaza to be able to do the proper reporting so we can find out exactly what is going on. Let's move on to another story now. This is in the Times, and we're going to go across the pond to the United States and the presidential race, and Kamala Harris doing very well in some of the polling, which, I mean, seems to me a surprise at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say that I thought that she would be clobbered by Donald Trump, and, you know, I wasn't wrong, but I've been wrong so far. Maybe I won't be wrong in the end.
We'll see where we get to in November.
I mean, they're pretty much neck and neck. Her sort of bounce that she had initially seems to be carrying on. And this state of Nevada, which was the narrowest Democratic hold last time round, now she's winning by 48% to 45%. It's a very poor, deprived state, lots of black and Hispanic people who are turning, it seems, more to Kamala Harris. And the question really is whether this can be seen as a bellwether of November or not. Obviously, it's too early to tell, but certainly she's doing much better than a lot of us thought.
Yeah, she's ahead in some of the other battleground states as well. Wisconsin, Michigan, I believe, and Pennsylvania too.
And nationally, she's ahead. And what's interesting in Nevada is that Trump was significantly ahead of Biden, but is now not ahead of her. And maybe the honeymoon won't end. I think in the papers this week, we've seen a lot of comment on Trump not quite being able to handle being her opponent and just slagging her off rather than really getting into policy debate, so that she looks like the calmer one. And he has been looking verging on the irrational sometimes.
Yeah, I mean,
his
Donald Trump. I mean,
the thing is, he's not a good candidate. I mean, obviously he's got a huge cult status in his base, but he's got a very limited capacity to reach out to the swing to the middle voters and to take people to the undecided voters and so forth. But previously he was up against in some ways an even worse candidate of Biden, who was cruising for a bruising in November. Now he's got a semi-competent candidate. He's actually beginning to struggle.
Unfortunately, we don't have any time left to continue discussing. We could have talked about that, I'm sure, all night. Really good talk, guys. Jake, Dorothy, thanks so much. You're going to stick around, I am sure. All right, now, coming up on Sky News at 11, President Biden says that a ceasefire in Gaza is closer than it's ever been, urging all sides to avoid any action that could undermine the peace process following the conclusion of this latest round of talks in Qatar.